The school morning began like any other. The building stood quiet from the outside, its faded walls holding years of noise, laughter, and secrets. Parents dropped their children at the gate, teachers walked in with tired faces, and students hurried inside before the bell rang. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing ever did. Among the children was a young girl who walked more slowly than the others. She carried her bag close to her chest, as if holding on to it gave her some kind of protection. Her eyes moved around constantly, not out of curiosity, but fear. She looked toward the older part of the building, the section that most people ignored. That was where the basement was. The girl had tried to speak before. She had tried many times. Each time, her words had been brushed aside. Teachers told her not to imagine things. Staff members told her she was misunderstanding. Other students laughed and said she was making up stories. After a while, people stopped listening completely. Still, she tried again. That morning, she stood near the gate and watched parents leave. She was waiting for one person. She did not know his name, only that he came every day, always distracted, always in a hurry. He walked with long steps, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on something far away. He never looked around. He never noticed her. He was a man carrying the weight of many responsibilities. Work had taken over most of his life. His thoughts were always filled with meetings, deadlines, and problems that needed fixing. He believed he was doing the right thing by providing for his family. He believed being busy meant being responsible. His son attended this school. That was why he came here every morning. The girl watched him approach. Her heart beat faster. She stepped forward, then stopped. Fear pulled her back. She had been ignored so many times that her confidence felt worn down. Still, she knew she had to try. She spoke softly at first, but her voice was lost in the noise of the street. Cars passed. Other parents talked loudly. She tried again, louder this time, sir, she said. The man did not hear her. He was focused on his phone, nodding as he listened to someone speak from the other end. She took another step closer. Sir, please, she said again. He waved his hand slightly, a signal that he was busy. He did not look at her. To him, she was just another child asking for something unimportant. The girl felt a familiar sting in her chest. The feeling of being invisible. She could have walked away. Many times before, she had done just that. But today felt different. The fear inside her was stronger. Something had happened the day before. Something she could not forget. She remembered the sound, the smell, the darkness. Her fingers tightened around the straps of her bag. She gathered what little courage she had left. Sir, she said, her voice shaking now. It's about the basement. The man paused slightly but did not turn. He was used to children saying strange things. He continued walking, still talking into his phone. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She swallowed hard and said the words that changed everything. It's about your son. The man stopped. The phone slipped slightly from his ear as his body froze. For the first time, he turned and looked directly at her. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. What did you say? He asked. The girl hesitated. Now that she had his attention, fear rushed in stronger than before. She looked around, making sure no one else was close enough to hear. I saw him near the basement, she said quietly. And something is wrong down there. The man felt a sudden tightness in his chest. His first instinct was denial. Children misunderstood things all the time. They imagined danger where there was none. That area is locked, he said firmly. Students aren't allowed there. The girl shook her head. It's not always locked. He studied her face. She did not look like someone making up a story. She looked scared, tired, like someone who had been holding a secret for too long. Still, he pushed the feeling away. Go to class, he said, his tone controlled but distant. You shouldn't talk about things you don't understand. Her eyes widened. Please, she said. I tried to tell others. No one listens. He sighed. He had already wasted too much time. Work was waiting. Life was demanding. He could not afford to get involved in every concern a child brought to him. Everything is fine, he said. You're safe. My son is safe." He turned away and walked toward his car. The girl stood there watching him leave. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She felt something heavier than sadness. She felt guilt. If something happened now, she would always wonder if she could have said more. Inside the school, the bell rang. The day moved forward as if nothing had happened. In his office later that morning, the man tried to focus on his work. Emails piled up. Meetings filled his schedule. Yet his mind kept drifting back to the girl's face. "It's about your son." He shook his head, annoyed at himself. Children said strange things. He reminded himself of that. There was no reason to panic still when he checked his phone during lunch. He noticed he had missed a message from the school the day before. It was a general notice. Nothing urgent. But the timing made him uneasy. That afternoon, when he picked his son up, he noticed something different. His son was quieter than usual. He walked beside him instead of running ahead. "Everything okay?" the man asked casually. The boy nodded. But his eyes avoided his father's. They got into the car and drove home in silence. That night, after dinner, the man passed by his son's room and noticed the light was still on. He paused at the door. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I can't." The boy replied. The man leaned against the doorframe. "Why?" The boy hesitated. "School stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "Nothing." The man felt the same tightness in his chest from that morning. He wanted to push the feeling away again, but this time it stayed. Later that night, long after everyone was asleep, the man lay awake staring at the ceiling. The girl's voice echoed in his mind. Her fear felt real now. He told himself he would ask someone at the school the next day, just to be sure. But deep down he already knew something was wrong, and somewhere in the quiet building of the school, the basement door remained closed, hiding things no child should ever have to see. The next morning began differently for him, even though everything around him looked the same. The road to the school was crowded as usual. Parents stopped their cars in a rush. Children laughed, complained, or stayed quiet depending on the day they were having. But inside his mind, nothing felt normal anymore. He parked the car and sat still for a moment before getting out. His hands rested on the steering wheel longer than usual. The girl's words from the previous day replayed again and again in his head. He had tried to forget them, but they refused to fade. "It's about your son," told himself not to overthink. Worrying without proof would only make things worse. Still, his eyes searched the school building the moment he stepped out of the car. He noticed details he had ignored for years. The old walls, the side entrance that few people used, the narrow path leading toward the back. His son walked beside him quietly. Usually the boy talked about small things, friends, games, silly moments in class. Today, he said nothing. "Did anything happen yesterday?" the man asked casually, trying not to sound concerned. The boy shrugged. "No, are you sure?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly. The man recognized that tone. It was the same tone he used himself when he wanted to avoid a conversation. They reached the gate. The boy stepped forward, then stopped. "Dad?" he said softly. The man turned. Yes, the boy opened his mouth, then closed it again. He shook his head. Nothing. He ran inside before his father could respond. The man stood there, watching him disappear into the building. A quiet fear settled deep in his chest. He remembered all the times he had been too busy to notice small changes, too tired to ask deeper questions, too confident that everything was fine. As he turned to leave, he saw the girl again. She stood near the same spot as the day before, holding her bag tightly. When their eyes met, she froze. For a moment it looked like she might run away. He walked toward her instead. "Wait," he said. She stopped but did not turn around. "I want to hear what you were trying to tell me," he said slowly. She faced him. Her eyes were red, as if she had cried. She looked unsure, like she was trying to decide whether trusting him again was worth the risk. "You didn't believe me?" she said quietly. "I didn't listen," he replied. Saying it out loud felt heavier than he expected. She stayed silent. "Please," he said, "tell me what you know." She looked around nervously. Not here. They moved a few steps away, closer to the fence where fewer people stood. The noise of the street softened, but her voice still shook. I saw him go down the stairs near the storage area, she said. The door was open. It's not always locked, like they say. With fighters of favor for size, he asked. I did, she replied. More than once. What did they say? That I was imagining things. That I should focus on my studies. He clenched his jaw. And my son? He looked scared, she said. Not hurt, just scared. The man felt a sharp pain in his chest at those words. Did you follow him? He asked. She nodded slowly. Only a little. It was dark. I heard voices. Adult voices. His heart began to race. Did you see anyone? No, I ran. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Panic would not help anyone. Thank you for telling me, he said. You did the right thing. Her eyes widened slightly. No one had said that to her before. What happens now? She asked. He did not have a clear answer, but he knew one thing for sure. I won't ignore this again, he said. That day at work, he could not concentrate at all. He reread emails without understanding them. He checked the time again and again. By afternoon, he had made a decision. He would go to the school. Not as a rushed parent, but as someone who intended to stay. When he arrived later, the school halls were quieter. Classes were still in session, but the usual chaos had settled into low murmurs behind closed doors. He asked at the front desk to speak with someone about security concerns. The staff member smiled politely. Everything is handled properly here, she said. There's no need to worry. I'd still like to ask a few questions, he replied. She hesitated, then nodded and pointed him toward an office. The conversation that followed was polite, calm, and deeply unsatisfying. He was told the basement was restricted, that inspections were done regularly, that children were safe. None of it matched what he had seen in his son's behavior, or the fear in the girl's eyes. As he walked out, he noticed the door at the end of the corridor, the one leading toward the older section of the building. A sign hung on it, faded and crooked. Authorized access only. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at it that night at home. He finally sat beside his son instead of rushing past his room. You can tell me anything, he said gently. The boy stared at the floor. His hands twisted together. Even if you think it will make someone upset, the man added. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. I don't like that place. What place? The stairs. The man felt his breath catch. Which stairs? The ones that go down? Silence filled the room. Who told you to go there? The man asked carefully. No one, the boy said. They said it was part of helping. Helping. The word echoed in the man's mind long after his son fell asleep. He sat alone in the living room, lights off, staring into the darkness. The pieces were beginning to connect, and what they formed scared him more than anything he had imagined. He realized something then. Ignoring the girl had been his first mistake. Waiting any longer would be the next. He reached for his phone. This time, he was not going to stay silent. That night, sleep did not come easily. The man lay awake, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Every small noise felt louder than usual. The words his son had spoken stayed with him, turning over and over in his mind. They said it was part of helping. The word felt wrong. It felt too simple for something that carried so much fear. When morning came, he got up before the alarm. He watched his son eat breakfast, noticing things he had overlooked for a long time. The way the boy barely touched his food, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he flinched slightly when the phone rang. "You don't have to go today," the man said carefully. The boy looked up in surprise. "Really?" "Yes," he replied. "I can talk to the school." The boy hesitated. "Will they be angry?" That question hurt more than anything else. "No," the man said firmly. "No one has the right to be angry with you." He called the school and said his son would be absent due to illness. The voice on the other end was polite but rushed. No questions were asked. That alone made him uneasy. After the call ended, he sat quietly, thinking. He knew he could not ignore this any longer. Whatever was happening had gone on because too many adults had chosen comfort over responsibility. Later that morning, he drove toward the school anyway. Not to drop off his son, but to observe. He parked farther away this time, where he could see the back of the building without being noticed. The older section looked forgotten, paint peeled from the walls. Windows were small and dusty. A narrow door sat near the corner, partly hidden by overgrown bushes. He had passed it countless times without ever paying attention. That door led to the basement. He stayed in the car, watching staff members come and go. Nothing unusual happened. Children did not go near that area. Everything looked normal. Normal can hide many things. In the afternoon, he returned home. His son spent most of the day in his room, quiet but calmer than before. That alone confirmed the man's growing fear. Whatever the boy had been facing, school was part of it. As evening approached, he made another decision. He would return after hours when darkness settled and the neighborhood grew quiet. He drove back to the school. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only one light remained on near the main entrance. He did not park close. He walked instead, keeping his steps slow and careful. His heart beat hard in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would only cloud his judgment. The back door was exactly where he had seen it earlier. Up close, it looked worse than he expected. The handle was worn. The lock scratched, as if it had been forced open more than once. He tried the handle, it moved. A chill ran through him. He pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit him immediately. Damp air mixed with old dust. The kind of smell that told him no one cared enough to fix what was broken. The stairs were narrow and steep. A single bulb flickered above, casting weak light down the steps. He paused at the top, listening silence. He stepped down slowly. Each step creaked under his weight. The walls closed in as he descended, the air growing colder with every step. His thoughts raced, but one image stayed clear in his mind. His son, standing here, alone. At the bottom, the hallway stretched out, dim and uneven. Doors lined the walls, some closed, some slightly open. He noticed marks on the floor, scuff marks. Small footprints. His chest tightened. He did not open any doors. Not yet. He wanted to understand the space first, to see how far it went, to know what his son might have seen. A sound broke the silence. Voices, adult voices. They were distant, but real. He froze, his body pressed against the wall. The voices grew clearer for a moment, then faded again. Fear surged through him. But it was mixed with something else now. Anger. He backed away slowly, retracing his steps without making a sound. When he reached the stairs, he did not run. He forced himself to move calmly, steadily. Until he was outside again, the door closed behind him with a soft click. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He sat in his car for a long time, staring at the building. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Everything the girl had said was true. Everything his son had hinted at was real. This was no misunderstanding. This was neglect. This was silence protecting the wrong people. When he got home, he went straight to his son's room. The boy looked up, startled. "You're safe," the man said, sitting beside him. "I promise." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "You believe me now?" "Yes," he said. "I should have believed you before." They sat together in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. That night, the man began writing everything down. Dates, small details, conversations, the girl's words, his son's fear. What he had seen himself, he knew one thing. Once the truth was spoken, it could not be taken back, and he was finally ready to speak. The morning after, he wrote everything down. The man felt a strange mix of fear and clarity. Fear, because he knew what he was about to do would change many lives, including his own. Clarity, because for the first time in a long while, he was no longer unsure. He made breakfast for his son and sat with him at the table instead of rushing around. The boy looked at him carefully, as if trying to understand whether this calm version of his father would last. "You're not going to school today?" the man said gently. The boy nodded. He did not ask why. That alone said enough. After breakfast, the man made a few phone calls. He chose his words carefully. He did not accuse. He did not exaggerate. He spoke only about concerns, observations, and the need for answers. Some people listened. Some did not. One voice on the phone told him he was overreacting. Another suggested he'd wait and see. A third promised to look into it, but sounded more interested in ending the call. By midday, frustration settled in. He realized how easy it was for systems to protect themselves instead of the people they were meant to serve. He did not stop. In the afternoon, he returned to the school, this time openly. He asked to speak with the administration. He brought notes with him, dates, times, small details that showed a pattern. The conversation was tense but controlled. Faces across the desk stayed calm, but their eyes shifted too often. He recognized the signs of discomfort. "We take safety very seriously," one of them said. "So do I," he replied. "That's why I'm here." He spoke about rules, inspections, and policies. He spoke about children, about fear, about silence at one point. Someone suggested that the girl might be confused. He stood up. "She tried to warn people," he said firmly. She was ignored. The room went quiet. He left knowing he would not get the answers he needed from that office alone. That evening, he spoke to the girl's guardian. It was not an easy conversation. Trust had already been damaged by too many adults failing to listen. But slowly, the pieces came together. The girl had changed over the past months. Nightmares, anxiety, refusal to use certain hallways at school. She had been carrying fear without support. The man felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on his shoulders. Over the next few days, more parents began to notice changes in their children. Quiet behavior, avoidance, sudden fear of places, he could not explain. What started as one voice became several. Meetings were requested. Questions were asked more loudly. Silence became harder to maintain. The school announced an internal review. It was not enough. The man understood that truth required light, not quiet promises. One evening, after his son had gone to sleep, he sat alone and read through his notes again. He thought about the girl standing at the gate, how easily he had walked away. He promised himself he would not make that mistake again. The next step was difficult, but necessary. He reached out beyond the school when the attention finally came. It was uncomfortable for everyone involved. Questions were asked publicly. Records were reviewed. Spaces that had been ignored were opened. The basement was no longer hidden. What followed was slow and heavy. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden fixes, only careful steps taken by people who finally understood the seriousness of what had been allowed to happen. The children were given space to speak. Some chose to remain silent. Others shared small pieces, slowly, on their own terms. The girl was among those who spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply told what she had seen and how she had felt when no one listened. The room stayed quiet as she spoke. The man watched from the side, his chest tight with emotion. He felt pride, guilt, and sadness all at once. His son stayed close to him, holding his hand. For the first time, the boy looked lighter. Days turned into weeks. Changes were made. Access points were restricted properly. Oversight increased. Adults were reminded of their duty. It was not perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, the girl stood near the gate again. This time, she was not alone. Her guardian stood beside her. When the man approached, she looked up. "You listened," she said. He nodded. "I should have sooner." She smiled faintly. That small moment meant more than any official statement at home that night. The man sat with his son and talked openly. Not just about fear, but about trust. About speaking up. About how silence can hurt. "I'll always listen," he said. The boy believed him. Outside, life moved forward as usual. Cars passed. People hurried. The world did not stop for lessons learned quietly, but inside that family, and inside a school that had been forced to face itself, something had changed. And it began with a girl who refused to stay silent. Time did not move fast after everything came into the open. It moved carefully, like people were afraid that one wrong step might undo the small progress that had been made. Life returned to routines, but those routines felt different now. Heavier with awareness, the man noticed the change most clearly in his son. The boy laughed more easily. He slept through the night. He no longer watched doorways with quiet fear. These were small changes, but they meant everything. Every morning, they talked. Not rushed words spoken while tying shoes or grabbing keys, but real conversations. Sometimes they spoke about school. Sometimes about nothing important at all. The man learned that listening did not always require answers. Sometimes it only required presence. The girl continued attending school, but her days were not the same as before. Teachers paid closer attention. Staff spoke more gently. When she raised her hand, she was acknowledged. When she spoke, people listened. She did not smile all the time. Healing was not simple or fast, but she walked with her head higher now, no longer shrinking into herself. The school itself felt quieter, not in a fearful way, but in a reflective one. Adults moved with more care. Hallways were watched. Doors that once stood forgotten were now properly secured. No one spoke loudly about the past. There was no need. It lived in small reminders, in pauses during conversations, in the way adults knelt to children's eye level instead of talking over them. One afternoon, the man was called into the school. Not for trouble, but for a meeting meant to review changes and next steps. He sat among other parents, listening as procedures were explained. He did not feel proud. He felt responsible. Responsibility, he had learned, did not end when a problem was exposed. It began there. After the meeting, he stepped outside and saw the girl near the gate. She was talking to another student, her hands moving as she spoke. When she noticed him, she paused. "Hi," she said. "Hi," we replied. They stood quietly for a moment. "I'm glad you said something," he told her. She nodded. "I was scared." "I know," he said. "You were brave anyway." She thought about that, then smiled softly. At home that evening, the man sat alone after his son went to sleep. He thought about the person he had been before all of this. Busy, distracted, certain that providing money was the same as providing care. He understood how wrong that belief had been. Care was attention. Care was listening. Care was taking fear seriously, even when it was inconvenient. Weeks passed. Then months' life slowly found balance again. Not the careless balance of before, but a thoughtful one. One day his son came home excited about a project at school. He talked quickly, his words tumbling over each other. The man listened. That simple act felt like a promise kept. The girl moved forward too. She joined activities. She made friends who knew how to listen. The shadow she once carried grew lighter with time. Sometimes she still remembered the basement, but it no longer defined her. On a quiet evening, near the end of the school year, the man stood by the window watching his son play outside. He thought about how close he had come to missing the truth entirely, all because he almost ignored one small voice. He knew now that real change often began quietly, with someone speaking up and someone else choosing, finally, to listen. The world did not change overnight, but for one girl, one boy, and one father, it changed enough, and that was everything. The months that followed brought a quiet kind of change, the kind that did not announce itself but slowly reshaped daily life. The man noticed it first in himself. He no longer rushed through mornings with his mind already at work. He stayed present. He noticed small things, like the way his son's mood changed with the weather, or how silence sometimes meant more than words. His son grew more confident with time. He asked questions freely now. He spoke about his feelings without fear of being dismissed. When something bothered him, he said so. The man listened, even when the topic felt small or uncomfortable. At school, the environment continued to improve. There were regular meetings with parents. Safety rules were discussed openly. Staff members were reminded again and again that children's voices mattered. The girl remained an important part of that change, even without realizing it. She did not see herself as brave or special. She simply knew what it felt like not to be heard, and she did not want that silence to return. One afternoon, she sat in class and noticed another student looking uneasy. The girl leaned closer and whispered, "Are you okay?" It was a simple question, but it carried weight. Someone noticed. Someone cared. That small moment reflected how far she had come. The man heard about it later from a teacher who spoke with respect in her voice. Hearing that filled him with a quiet pride, not just in the girl, but in the progress that had been made. Still, healing was not perfect. Some days were harder than others. Memories did not disappear simply because the truth had been spoken. One night, his son woke from a bad dream. The man sat beside him until the fear passed. They did not rush the moment. They let it take the time it needed. "You're safe," the man said. The boy nodded, holding on to that reassurance. As the school year moved on, there were fewer reminders of the past, but the lessons remained. Adults listened more carefully. Children trusted a little more. The girl sometimes thought about the day she stood at the gate, watching adults walk past her. She remembered how small she felt. That memory stayed with her, not as pain, but as a reminder of why speaking up mattered. She knew now that voices, even quiet ones, could lead to change. Near the end of the year, there was a small gathering at the school. Nothing formal. Just parents, teachers, and children coming together. The man stood nearby, watching his son laugh with friends. The girl stood across the yard. Talking easily, her shoulders relaxed, the man realized something important then. The story did not end when the truth was revealed. It continued in the way people chose to act afterward, in listening and care and responsibility as they walked home that evening. The man and his son talked about the future, about hopes, about things they wanted to learn and try. The man listened, and in that simple act, the meaning of everything they had been through became clear. Sometimes, change begins with a warning, but it lasts only when someone chooses to hear it. The quiet street stretched ahead of them, calm and ordinary. And for the first time in a long while, it felt enough. The new school year began with a feeling that was difficult to explain. It was not excitement, and it was not fear. It was awareness. People noticed more now. They listened more. And because of that, the building felt different. Even though it looked the same from the outside, the man walked with his son toward the gate on the first day back. The boy's steps were steady. He no longer hesitated before entering the building. That alone told the man how far they had come. "You'll be okay," the man said. "I know," the boy replied, and this time he meant it. They stopped near the gate, and the man watched his son join the other children. There was laughter, noise, and the usual chaos of a school morning. But there was also something else. Care. The girl stood a little distance away, talking with a friend. She noticed the man and gave a small nod. No words were needed. They both understood what that moment represented. Life moved forward. The man returned to his routines, but he carried the lessons with him. At work, he listened more carefully. At home, he paid attention to changes in tone, in silence, in behavior. He no longer assumed that quiet meant everything was fine. His son grew into himself more each day. Confidence showed in the way he spoke, the way he laughed, the way he asked for help without shame. Sometimes memories returned. A sound, a smell, a dark stairway remembered for a moment too long. When that happened, they talked. They did not hide from it. The girl continued to grow as well. She discovered strength in ordinary moments, in speaking kindly, in noticing others, in understanding that her voice mattered even when it shook. One afternoon, she was asked to help welcome a new student. She smiled and said yes without hesitation. The simple act felt important. Years later, the man would think back to these days often, not with pain, but with clarity. He would remember how close he had come to missing the truth, how easy it had been to walk away, and how everything changed because he finally stopped. The story did not become famous. There were no headlines, no loud celebrations, but it lived on quietly, in the way the boy grew into a man who spoke up, in the way the girl carried empathy into her future, in the way one family learned that listening is not optional, it is necessary. On an ordinary morning, long after the fear had faded, the man stood watching the school from a distance. Children ran inside, full of energy and noise. He smiled softly. Some lessons are learned the hard way, but when they are learned, they shape everything that comes after, and that was enough. As time passed, the events that once felt heavy began to settle into memory, not forgotten, but understood. The man noticed how life slowly shaped itself around what they had learned. Problems still came, as they always do. But they were faced differently now. His son grew older, moving into a new stage of school. New teachers, new classrooms, new expectations. But one thing remained steady. He spoke when something felt wrong. He asked questions. He trusted that someone would listen. At home, conversations became deeper. They talked about fairness, about responsibility, about how adults are not always right simply because they are older. These talks were not lectures. They were shared thoughts, built together. The girl moved forward too. She carried herself with quiet confidence. She did not seek attention or praise. She simply lived honestly, aware of her surroundings and the people in them. She understood now that being kind did not mean staying silent. That lesson stayed with her. The school continued to change in small ways. New systems were put in place. New staff were trained. Old habits were questioned. Progress was not perfect, but it was steady. One afternoon, the man was invited to speak during a small parent meeting. He did not prepare a speech. He simply spoke from experience. He talked about listening, about believing children, about how ignoring a warning can cost more than time. People listened after the meeting. Several parents thanked him quietly, not with excitement, but with understanding. They saw themselves in his story at home that evening. The man reflected on how far they had come. He remembered the gate, the rushed morning, the girl standing there waiting for someone to notice. He knew now that moments like that appear in many lives. Most pass unnoticed. But when one is recognized, it can change everything. The boy sat beside him, working on homework. He looked up suddenly. "Thanks for listening to me," he said. The man smiled. Always. Outside, the evening settled softly over the street. Ordinary sounds filled the air. Life continued, shaped quietly by lessons learned the hard way. And in that quiet continuation, there was hope. The years did not erase what happened, but they softened its sharpest edges. Life grew wider. New routines replaced old fears, and ordinary days carried quiet meaning. The man watched his son step into another stage of growing up. The boy asked bigger questions now, about right and wrong, about responsibility, about what to do when adults fail. They talked often, not because something was wrong, but because talking had become normal. The man learned that trust is built in moments that seem small. A question answered honestly, a feeling taken seriously, a pause long enough to let someone finish speaking. The girl continued forward on her own path. She did not define herself by what she had seen or done in the past, but she carried awareness with her. She noticed who felt left out, who stayed quiet, who needed someone to ask if they were okay. That awareness shaped her choices at school. New students arrived each year, unaware of the history hidden in the walls. That was how it should be. Safety meant they never had to know. The building stood calmer now. Not perfect, but watched. Cared for. One afternoon, the man volunteered at a school event. He stood near the edge, observing more than participating. He saw children laughing freely, teachers guiding with patience, parents listening instead of rushing away. He felt something close to peace. Later that day, his son joined him. "I like how it feels here now," the boy said. "So do I." The man replied. That simple exchange carried years of learning. The girl passed by, walking with friends. She laughed easily. The heaviness she once carried no longer showed in her steps, the man realized. Something important then. Change does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply lives quietly in better days. As evening came, families left the school grounds one by one. The noise faded. Calm returned. The man walked home with his son, talking about plans, dreams, and small hopes for the future. He listened, and in that listening, the meaning of everything they had been through remained clear. The world would always have moments when voices are ignored, but it would also have people who choose to stop and hear, in that choice, repeated again and again, was what truly mattered. The years passed quietly, marked not by fear anymore, but by understanding. What once felt like a breaking point became a foundation for something stronger. The man often thought about how life might have gone if he had continued to ignore that small voice at the gate. That thought stayed with him, not as regret, but as a reminder. His son grew into his teenage years with a sense of confidence that surprised many people. He spoke clearly. He asked questions when rules did not make sense. He showed kindness to others who seemed unsure or alone. These traits did not come from lectures. They came from being heard. At home, conversations remained open. Sometimes they talked about serious things. Other times about small, ordinary moments. Both mattered equally. The man learned that presence was not about grand actions, but about consistency. The girl continued her journey as well. She did not become loud or demanding. She became steady. She knew when to speak and when to listen. She understood that courage did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like honesty. She moved through school with quiet strength. Teachers noticed her sense of awareness. Other students felt safe around her. She did not try to lead. She simply cared. The school itself stood as a place that had learned a difficult lesson. New policies existed, but more important than rules was attitude. Adults watched more closely. They asked better questions. They took concerns seriously even when those concerns seemed small. One afternoon, the man was asked to attend a small discussion with new parents. He did not speak as an expert. He spoke as someone who had once failed to listen and chose to change. He talked about time, about attention, about how quickly a warning can be dismissed. When life feels busy, the room stayed quiet as he spoke. Later, a parent approached him and said, "I will listen more carefully now." That simple sentence felt powerful at home that night. The man sat with his son on the porch. The air was calm. The street was quiet. "Do you ever think about that time?" the boy asked. "Yes," the man replied. "Does it still bother you?" "It reminds me," he said. "That's different." The boy nodded, understanding more than the man expected. The girl, now older, walked her own path forward. She carried empathy with her, shaped by experience, not bitterness. She believed in speaking up, but also in listening deeply. Life continued, as it always does. New challenges appeared. New lessons waited to be learned, but one truth stayed. Constant. Listening changes lives. The man understood that now better than ever. On an ordinary evening, long after the events that once shook their world, The man watched the sun set. He felt gratitude. Not because life was perfect, but because it was honest. Sometimes, the most important stories are not about what happened, but about what people chose to do afterward. And that choice, to listen, continued to shape everything that followed.